In the afterlife, there is such an astonishing phenomenon that upon learning about it, every person will be stunned. It seems impossible for this to be true, yet this phenomenon of another world cannot be ignored. However, unfortunately, this is often left unspoken. Many people talk about the structure of the other world, but for some reason, this fact is overlooked. This applies both to those who have experienced the existence beyond our earthly life, as well as to most mediums. What is it that so alarms them, making them prefer to remain silent on this subject? One of those who revealed part of this mystery was an Englishman named George Vale Owen. After his mother passed away in 1909, he discovered his ability to practice mediumship. His deceased mother from the afterlife told him about the existence of a rather strange phenomenon, a vast number of souls that do not realize they have already died, even while being beyond the earthly reality. Owen's mother explained in detail why this happens, what fate awaits such souls, and how they are being convinced that they have transitioned into a different state of existence. In one of her first messages, she remarked, "In the astral sphere, there are millions of souls for whom the revelation that life exists after death is a true shock. Many of them were convinced that death meant the end of everything, but realizing that this is not the case, and that life continues after earthly existence ends, often causes them indignation, especially when they learn that in order to move toward a better life, they must learn the laws of the new world. In the end, these souls find it easier to convince themselves that nothing has happened, rather than accepting the existence of a new reality." In the messages received by the medium, his mother also said that one of the main reasons why some souls cannot accept that they have died is because after leaving their physical bodies, they can still see, hear, and move just as before. Therefore, they believe that no changes have occurred in their existence. Of course, some of them do notice changes in their sensations, but they find their own explanations for this. For example, if a person suffered from a severe illness during their lifetime that caused them physical pain, after losing connection with their body, they of course stop feeling pain. But this is not perceived as evidence of transitioning to another world, but rather as an anomaly. Many explain the absence of pain by claiming that they are simply sleeping. Such souls begin to fear their awakening, because then the pain will return. That is why they so persistently reject anything that might disrupt their illusion. Other souls refuse to believe in the completion of their physical existence because, during their earthly life, they were convinced that death meant the end of everything. They find it especially difficult in the afterlife, as, besides the necessity of radically changing their worldview, they are not prepared for a spiritual form of existence. They denied it in the material world. Owen's mother, in her messages, said the following on this matter. To understand what such souls are facing, I will give a figurative example. Imagine that you have constantly convinced yourself that a certain country does not exist, and then, suddenly, you find yourself in it. It is clear that you are confused and disoriented because all the time that could have been used to prepare for such a journey, you spent on self-deception. And on the other hand, those who believed in the immortality of their soul during their earthly life, after death, find themselves in some peaceful and beautiful place, surrounded by deceased relatives and friends who help them adapt to the new world. These souls quickly lose attachment to earthly life, realize their mistakes, and the lessons they have learned. They understand what they need to do next in order to become better. Over time, their spiritual body becomes finer, allowing them to ascend to higher levels of existence. Moreover, Owen's mother added that sometimes even religious people refuse to accept their death because they are shocked when they realize that life in the other world does not match their religious beliefs and expectations. Additionally, in the afterlife, some souls face difficulties in recognizing the reality of their posthumous existence if their earthly life was suddenly cut short for some reason. They simply did not have time to comprehend what happened. In the messages received by the medium from his mother, it was mentioned that souls who are too attached to important things on earth often reject their posthumous existence. As George Owen himself wrote about this, souls that refuse to acknowledge the fact of their death may settle in places they loved very much during their life. Some get stuck in their own home, while others end up in the place where they transition to the other world. Often, There is also a psychic connection between the soul of the deceased person and the people who acquired the house where they once lived and were emotionally attached to excessively. In such a case, the new owners may encounter various supernatural phenomena, such as ghosts. By the way, Owen's mother noted that sometimes souls who refuse to acknowledge the reality of the afterlife and the completion of their earthly existence gather together in some house. This is when the so-called haunted houses appear. In fact, they are simply places where many souls who have not realized their death find themselves trapped by their own fear and spiritual blindness. Moreover, there are souls that refuse to acknowledge their death due to a strong attachment to those who are still alive. They may even try to establish contact by appearing in their astral form. However, this is extremely dangerous both for the soul itself and for the living person, as such a soul, even without realizing it, may drain their vital energy. There are also souls who do not realize their death and remain on Earth due to unfinished business. In some cases, they are held back by hatred or the desire for revenge for past wrongs. The saddest part is that this kind of existence can be compared to a life on the edge. However, one should not think that these souls are left without help. They are supported by the inhabitants of the spiritual world, who dedicate their lives to helping such souls. We use various methods to convince the soul of the completion of its earthly existence. Often, the soul realizes its death when it sees its own body and watches the people mourning its departure. Every soul is given the opportunity to attend its own funeral, watch its loved ones, and listen to their thoughts. Upon seeing this, the soul comes to the realization that it has died. However, even after such an experience, some souls continue to persist in their disbelief. In such cases, we are forced to leave them alone so they can reflect and come to the necessary conclusion. Sometimes, souls are encouraged to remember a deceased relative or friend. When the soul does this, it is given the opportunity to meet with them. Such meetings usually help convince the soul of the reality of the afterlife and its existence within it. Equally interesting messages from the other world were passed on by another Englishman, a scientist and publicist named William Stead, who perished in the sinking of the Titanic. He transmitted his messages to his own daughter, who recorded them through automatic writing. Here is what he said about himself in one of these messages. "I left earthly life several years ago, but my connection with it and with those who are dear to me has not been broken. Therefore, I wish to pass on to people the knowledge I have gained here in the true world." Even during his lifetime, William Stead believed that death is not the end, but rather a kind of transition, a door leading from one room to another, that is, from the material world to the spiritual. His own fate became a vivid confirmation of this idea. In his messages from the other world, William Stead detailed the events that occurred with him immediately after his death. According to him, at first he, along with other souls, observed how the Titanic sank into the water, and then all the deceased began their journey to the heavens. Soon they found themselves in a place called the Blue Island. Once there, each soul initially sought to be closer to the home they had left behind, often going to visit loved ones or to be in places where they had once felt happy. However, over time, this desire fades, and the process of distancing from the earthly world begins, which happens differently for each soul and takes varying amounts of time. William Stead, on Blue Island, met his father, who had passed away before him. The first thing that surprised him was that his father looked significantly younger than at the end of his earthly life. Now they seemed more like brothers than father and son. In his messages from the other world, Stead pointed out that the conditions of posthumous existence are determined by one's earthly life. If a person lives wisely, the true world awaits them with new, bright, and interesting experiences. William also emphasized that the earth is not an eternal world, but rather a kind of school. We are not here to accumulate wealth or enjoy earthly pleasures. We live on earth to understand our character and improve it. The step a person takes at the moment of death may seem small, but for the soul, it is colossal. In one moment, it covers a great distance, moving from an imperfect world to a world of divinity and harmony. Equally astonishing messages from the other world were transmitted by a young man named Leslie Stringfield, who revealed amazing details about how the afterlife is structured. He also uncovered secrets that other souls and mediums usually prefer to remain silent about. Leslie Stringfield, the only child in his family, passed away in 1886 after a short illness. The death of their son was a tremendous loss for his parents, who were devastated by grief. That is why Leslie Stringfield's parents tried with all their might to establish contact with him. Unfortunately, all the mediums they turned out to be frauds. None of them could pass even the simplest authenticity test for their messages. In despair, the parents decided to try to establish contact with their son on their own, attempting to reach the other world. Fortunately, they succeeded. Every evening, at the same time, they held sessions to communicate with Leslie, and what was transmitted through these sessions amazed everyone. Previously, no one had shared such detailed information about life after death. One of the most astonishing messages from Leslie Stringfield was a description of the geographical location of the afterlife in relation to our world. He explained that this world is right next to ours but in a different dimension. The spiritual world begins right next to the material realm and stretches for millions of miles in space, surrounding our world like the Earth's atmosphere. According to Leslie, in the afterlife, there is its own spiritual sun, which shines through the physical sun we know. We see its material form, but its true essence is spiritual, and it always shines in the afterlife, although sometimes for a few hours a day, its light is less intense. As for the weather in a metaphysical sense, Leslie said that it is always beautiful. The temperature in the afterlife is always comfortable, like on a warm summer day, there is no rain, and every couple of weeks there is a light mist. Leslie Stringfield lived in a part of the afterlife, known as the Land of Summer. As expected, this place was incredibly beautiful. Majestic trees grew there, flower meadows flourished, streams gurgled, mountains towered, and lakes shone. In the Land of Summer, one could meet not only modern animals, but also those that existed hundreds of thousands of years ago. There were also small settlements in the Land of Summer, resembling villages as well as huge cities. Interestingly, according to Leslie, this part of the afterlife was not created by God in a finished form, but became what it is due to the efforts of highly evolved souls. Leslie also claimed that the houses in which souls reside correspond to their spiritual vibrations. Bright souls live in beautiful houses surrounded by flowers, while dark souls dwell in terrifying huts amid swamps. The Land of Summer is a place where souls that cannot be clearly classified as good or bad usually end up. Most of its inhabitants are souls in the process of improvement. Regarding highly spiritual beings, Leslie said, all the great philosophers, spiritual mentors, and teachers, together with other souls studying mystical secrets, are in the higher spheres. Ordinary souls cannot enter there, but it is known that the higher spheres of existence are incredibly beautiful. Achieving a high spiritual state depends entirely on the desire of each soul and the efforts they make to acquire new knowledge. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comment. Your support helps develop the channel and create even more interesting content. Write in the comments what you think about this topic. It will be interesting to discuss. Speech balloon sparkles.